I shaved my head for 16 years, and as someone who did so, I want to give you an in-depth analysis of this topic, and I want to dispel some myths, both myths from inside the Chasidic world and outside in the broader world. So let's go. Number 1, Chasidic women are forced to shave. Is that true? Well, in my case, it definitely was not true. I was raised outside the Chasidic community, and I entered it before I got married. And nobody actually expected me to shave my head, though it was presented to me as an option. And in the end, I did decide to shave my head. Because bear in mind, I was living within one of the most pro-head shaving communities out there. And it wasn't all bad. Let's face it, a clean shaven head is very clean, it's very easy to manage, and even though it's rather ugly, it's quite comfortable. So I personally didn't have a problem with head shaving. In fact, the first time I shaved my head, it was actually a very funny event because the Rebbitzin who was helping me to shave my head shaved my head and left payas, and I put on my husband's kapel and his tzitzis, and I was pretending I was learning and I was jumping around. It was very funny. We were just doubled over in laughter. So I wasn't forced to shave, and it was not a miserable experience to me. That said, there definitely is a lot of societal pressure when it comes to head shaving, and some people do have very negative feelings around it. But other people are extremely proud to shave their heads. There's a whole gamut of experiences and so many different emotions, because every person is a world unto themselves. So no blanket statements, please. Not everybody is forced to, and not everybody is miserable. There's all different sorts of experiences. Now, because head shaving is a loaded topic, both within the Chasidic world and outside the Chasidic world, and I'm the type of person who wants to understand why we do the things that we do, I wanted to dive deep into this area, and I wanted to examine it through a lens of fact and fiction. I wanted to figure out why exactly people shave their heads. Where did this come from? Why do we do it, right? So let's go ahead and dive into the things that I found. So within the Hasidic community, there are several reasons that I've encountered, and these are the ones that are commonly touted. So let's go ahead and examine each of them. Reason number 1, the Zohar says explicitly that women should shave their heads. This is an oft-repeated statement, and it definitely deserves examination. But before we look at the sources inside the Zohar that are brought, let's just mention, for our viewers who may not know, that the Zohar is the realm of Jewish mysticism. Jewish law is one thing, and Jewish mysticism is something else. So anything that is learned out of Jewish mysticism is not legally binding upon the Jewish people, but some people do choose to observe customs that are learned out from Kabbalistic sources. All right, let's go. First source. Okay, there's a statement in the Parshas Nasoi section of the Zohar that seems to imply a woman should remove her hair before being intimate with her husband. And this is commonly used to back up the idea that a woman should shave her head right before she goes to the mikvah. And the grapes grow no hair nor beard, symbolic as it were of the female who has to remove her hair before having relations with a male and who is by nature beardless. Now, I'm not going to claim that I know exactly what the full text means, but I will say that aside from this simply being a passing reference to female hair removal, it doesn't even tell us what type of hair needs to be removed. It doesn't say if it's arm hair or eyebrow hair, right? It doesn't say. So how can we automatically assume that this is referring to head shaving? It can be read out as just any part of the hair. So we're actually going to have a great Kabbalist, the Bala Sulam, who's going to come along, and he's going to clarify that the hair in this passage actually refers to body hair. So if this Zohar is being used as a source for head shaving, I have to point out that we can just as easily use this source to support the necessity of Brazilian waxing before going to the mikvah, which in fact would be more in line with ancient Jewish tradition. As we find in the Gemara in Sanhedrin 21a, the Jewish women do not have armpit hair or personal hair. The Gemara is telling us here that it was ancient Jewish practice for Jewish women to remove their personal hair. Again, that's not law. That was just a custom that was practiced in that time. But the point is, from this passage, there's absolutely nothing that explicitly refers to shaving the head. That is a claim that is being made that is not actually within the text. So let's go ahead and look at another claim. This claim is that negative spiritual forces attach themselves to the hair, and therefore women should shave. And this idea is expressed by another passage in the Zohar. Now we're going to get a little bit deep on this one, so if you get lost, just bear with me. We will be back to smooth sailing soon. So in Jewish thought, hair is full of energy. Every strand of hair is like a tube that transports divine energy down to this world. And the energy that emerges from the strands of the hair is something that the negative forces in the world will attach to and they will nurse from. Now, I know this sounds kind of like, ooh, I get it. I'm a very down-to-earth, very practical person. I totally get it. But let me just point out that we are living in a world and in a time in which we know that there are forces around us that we don't necessarily always perceive, right? We live in a world where we know there's gravitational pull. There are gamma rays. There are audio waves, right? There's all different types of things that are happening around us that we don't necessarily understand. So in Jewish thought, there is divine energy, and we don't always perceive it. So hair is not just hair. Hair is a conduit for transporting divine energy down to this world. And to understand this better, we need to know that the human body is somewhat a metaphor for understanding God. After all, man is created in the image of God, and Job actually said, "From my flesh I see God." What this means is that in some way, the different parts of our bodies both reflect and give us an understanding of the way God interacts with this world, and it channels different divine attributes of God that manifest in this world. It does not mean that God is corporeal. It does not mean that God has a body. So be very, very careful with that. Let's get back to hair. So human beings have different types of hair, and different types of hair have different spiritual properties and therefore need to be treated differently. And this is something we see explicitly inside the Bible. Right? The Levites had their hair shaven. The Nazarite was not allowed to cut his hair until the time that he shaved it off. An adulterous woman had her hair uncovered and disheveled. The hair of the beard was not allowed to be shaved. Right? Different people, different types of hair, different solutions for the hair. And in fact, in Numbers chapter 6, verse 5, we find that the hair of the Nazarite is holy. It is holy hair. You see, through our earthly eyes, hair might just seem to be hair, but hair is so much more than that. It has incredible spiritual properties. The beard, for instance, is rooted in the 13 attributes of mercy, and the hairs of the beard actually serve to channel divine mercy down to this world. So people who follow Kabbalistic custom choose to let their hair grow naturally on their beard, and they don't trim it, they don't cut it, because they don't want to damage those channels. Now that's why, on a very deep level, shaving the beard is not allowed. But trimming the beard doesn't completely destroy those channels, so trimming would be allowed. Now, hair of the head is completely different than hair of the beard. The hair of the head is rooted in the attribute of justice. And remember what we said, there are different types of hair, there are different types of people. And this applies to gender too. You see, in Kabbalistic terminology, the man is Zeir Anpin, whereas the woman corresponds to Nukva. Whatever that means, you don't have to understand it. The point is that men and women are different, and their hair is also different, and it channels different types of energy. The hair of the man is channeling down very strict justice to this world, whereas the hair of the woman channels down less strict justice to this world. Now let's stop and think about this from a logical level. We don't want this world to be overrun with strict justice because nobody would survive. But we do need a measure of justice in this world, otherwise the world would be lawless. So we want to minimize the ability for strict justice to come down to this world, but we do want some justice to come down in a contained and controlled form. So the solution, according to Kabbalah, is that men who embody Zeir Anpin should cut their hair very, very short, and they should not channel the strict justice down to the world. And the solution for women is they should not cut their hair very short, because we need that justice to come down to this world that the hair of the woman channels. And we can see this very clearly spelled out in the Sefer Tamei HaMitzvos by the 13th century Kabbalist Rabbi Rekanati. He writes like this: "However, there is no sustained existence to the world except through the judgments, and it is not fitting to remove them completely. To that end, we need only retain the dimension of Malchus, which is Peah, but this applies only to the head of Zeir Anpin, man. However, Nukva does not shave her head," that's woman. "The reason is that since she corresponds to Nukva, and since all the judgments are on Asiya, were she to remove the judgments from the head of Nukva, there would not remain any judgments in the world. Accordingly, a woman needs to keep her hair and does not shave her head." I've also heard that the Ben Ish Chai says the same thing, that men should keep their hair very short, and he even promoted weekly haircuts for men, but that women should not shave. I haven't been able to locate the exact source of that, but if I do find it, I will put it into the comment section below. Now, aside from preventing this flow of strict justice into the world, shaving the head or cutting the hair very short for a man also stops those negative forces from attaching themselves to his hair, right? Which is a very good thing. But now we have to ask the question, if women are supposed to be keeping their hair in order to bring the good form of justice down to this earth, then what happens to those negative forces? Like, what's the solution for her? To understand that, we are going to go to another source that proponents of shaving bring, and they say that this is the most explicit source for shaving inside the Zohar. So let's go ahead and look at that. The hair and the nails grow, and therefore when a woman comes to purify herself, she must cut off the hair which grew in the days of her uncleanness, and cut her nails with all the filth that clings to them. Now, we're not going to get into what all that means. I mean, obviously there's a lot of Kabbalistic language here in this whole passage that we're not going to look at, but we don't need to look at all of that anyways. What I do understand and what I can present is the argument for shaving. The argument here is that there's a clear injunction to shave because it says the hair which grew in the days of her uncleanness is obviously the hair that grew from her head, because hair grows from the roots. So in order to get rid of the hair that grew during the days of her uncleanness, then we have to go ahead and we have to shave in order to remove that, right? That's the argument. Here's the big but. Again, the great Kabbalist, the Baal HaSulam, is going to elucidate this text. And he's going to tell us that it refers to trimming the hair in the amount that grew during the days of her uncleanness. So we are dealing with a measurement of length rather than a locale. And that's a very important distinction, because a woman can have hair any length that she desires, and she only needs to trim off the edges of it in order to get rid of those negative forces that attach themselves to the hair. Right? That's a huge, huge difference. Now, most importantly, the Baal HaSulam solution actually takes the full picture of a woman's hair and Kabbalistic understanding into context, because she's keeping her hair in order to channel this good, desirable form of justice into the world, but she's also getting rid of the negative forces that cling to the hair. Whereas shaving, while it would be a solution for those negative forces, it removes the needed aspect of justice, which would be problematic in the realm of Kabbalah. So no, this text inside of the Zohar does not state that a woman should shave. Absolutely not. Now, what the Zohar does explicitly say is that a woman should be exceedingly careful to adequately cover her hair. And the portion in Parshas Nasoy of the Zohar says very specifically that there's a lot of negative things that happen when a woman exposes her hair, whereas there's a lot of positive things that happen when she positively covers it. And Rabbi Rekanati, that great Kabbalist, is going to come along and he's going to explain to us that it is the exposure of the hair that causes the negative things to come about. Therefore, she should be very careful to cover her hair. It's the exposure that causes these negative forces to cling on, not the fact that she has the hair itself. All right? So again, the solution in the realm of Kabbalah is not shaving, it is adequately covering, which is a very, very important thing. Now, what I do suspect happened is that at some point in history, people began shaving, and they went back and they looked for sources that they could use to support their narrative. It's the classical case of not learning out from the text, but rather superimposing upon the text what you wanted to say. Now, there are other claims as to why Hasidic women shave, and we're going to go ahead and look at those ones. Some say it's a stringency to make sure that no hair peeks out from underneath the hair covering. But again, I think that's a later development that was developed in order to support head shaving that had already started. My question is still, when did this start? Where did this come from? It had to have a beginning point, because we know throughout Jewish history, Jewish women did not shave. We have explicit sources that tell us that Jewish women had hair, such as the story of Owen ben Pelas's wife, who exposed her hair and ended up saving her entire family, preventing Korach's delegation from approaching her tent. And then we have inside the Torah itself, we hear about the adulterous woman who has her head uncovered. And our sages say that her hair was disheveled during the proceedings, meaning she had hair. Hair that was supposed to have been for her husband, for the union between her and the man that she married, and not for any other man. You see, hair is very, very powerful. Hair is supposed to be reserved for the intimacy between a man and his wife. And because natural hair is so powerful and so attractive, Shir HaShirim actually uses the hair of a woman's side of a kerchief being praised by a man who loves her as a metaphor for the children of Israel. Hair has a very, very powerful force of attraction. And because it's powerful and it's important to the union between husband and wife, there's actually a discussion inside of the Gemara that says a man can annul his wife's vow to shave if he finds her repulsive because of it. You see, the Gemara understands that it is very possible for men to be repulsed by a shaven head, and that would be damaging to marital intimacy. That would be damaging to shalom bayis, and that's not something that we want. A husband and wife are supposed to find each other attractive. They're supposed to find each other desirous. They're supposed to want to be together. Moreover, the Torah actually explicitly equates a shaven head with unattractiveness. When it deals with the Ifas Torah, a woman who is taken captive in war, which is a fascinating, deep psychological study that we're not going to get into right now, she has her beautiful clothing taken away from her. Her nails are made to grow unkempt. And her head is shaven, specifically for the purpose of making her unattractive in order to discourage the union of marriage. The point is that the Torah view, and that of many men, is that hair enhances the intimate relationship and shaving does precisely the opposite. So aside from the Zohar not being the legitimate source for shaving, we also have the Torah-based negative association to contend with. Moreover, there may be a halachic issue. Now, I'm not a posek, I'm not saying it's asur, but there is the idea that a woman shaving her head is a woman taking a masculine haircut. And that might be problematic. But again, I'm not a posek and I'm not going to say if it's asur or not. Let's look at some other reasons that are given for Chasidic women shaving their heads. Another reason I've heard is that hair is considered a chatzitza, a barrier in regard to ritual immersion. But honestly, that makes no sense. Hair is not a chatzitza for kala, and it's certainly not a chatzitza for anybody. It can have a chatzitza if the hair becomes tangled, but the hair itself is not a chatzitza. Now, on a slightly different tone, some people claim that shaving is a stringency to ensure that hair is fully submerged within the mikveh. And I can definitely respect the sincerity with which people hold to these customs. And people really have their hearts in the right places. And they can say that they're doing it for the right reasons, and they might individually be doing it for the right reasons. But that still doesn't answer the question of when did shaving begin? When did it become a zach? These are things that I wanted to know. And after looking into this topic, it appears to me that the most logical claim that I've heard for the origin of head shaving is the claim that it was a community takana set into motion by the Vad Arba Aratzos, which was a Polish-Lithuanian council of Rabbanim that functioned from 1580 to 1764. And according to this claim, women at that time in that locale were not properly covering their hair. They had cast this mitzvah somewhat to the side. And the community needed to be shaken awake. So the communities underneath the Vad accepted upon themselves head shaving for a period of time in order to cause the women to stop and realign, to reevaluate, to get themselves back on track, to not go astray. And while that might not be something that would be accepted within today's world, it might be what was needed for that point in time. But anyways, I do think that this is probably the most logical source for the custom of head shaving. But the bottom line is if this is the source, it still leads us back to the importance of head covering, which is definitely something that we need to take very, very seriously. Head covering is our mitzvah. And while we're on the topic, I just want to give you a quick pro tip for properly covering the hair, whether you're shaven or whether you're not shaven. You can go ahead and you can use a wig grip and put it around the circumference of the hair at the hairline, and then you can put a wig cap on top of it and then cover it however you want. And that will ensure that the hairs stay inside where they're supposed to be. And moreover, it actually serves as a double head covering for those who want to keep the Kabbalistic tradition of having a double head covering. So that's just a quick pro tip. Now, with everything that we've spoken about and taking everything into consideration, you're probably wondering, like, my opinion. Do I think that everybody should just stop shaving? And the answer is no, I don't. You see, on an intellectual level, I don't think it's the best of ideas. And I don't think it's a higher madrega than having hair and properly covering it. In fact, I think it's a much lower madrega because it can damage shalom bayis. And it can damage a woman's own feelings. It can remove her femininity. It can make her feel less than. But I also think that human beings are a world unto themselves. And everybody has to stop and they have to take the information in hand and they have to examine it in light of their own feelings, their husband's feelings, and their feelings regarding their society. Because sometimes people choose to blend into a society just to blend in. That's what makes them comfortable. So a person has to take the entire package into consideration and make their choice. Personally, I see absolutely no problem with a woman choosing to shave. I mean, if a hipster from Williamsburg can choose to shave her head, why can't a Chasidic woman from Williamsburg? Can we have some fair standards, please? Everybody's allowed to make their own decision. What I do think is problematic is that sources are being quoted out of context and people are being told this is absolute truth. And there are people who do have negative feelings towards head shaving. Like, let's not be blind. Let's not pretend it doesn't happen. There are people who do. And many people who feel negatively towards a custom, they're at risk of throwing away their relationship with God over this custom because of those negative feelings. And that is an absolute tragedy. So what I think is that it's very important for everybody to understand one vital concept that my families must be explained to me. He said there's Yiddishkeit, there's Judaism, and there's Frumkeit, there's religiosity. Yiddishkeit is your relationship with God. It's the Taryag mitzvahs. It's knowing what the mitzvahs in the Torah actually are and doing them and investing your heart into them. And then there's Frumkeit. There's religiosity. There's societal standards. There are all the add-ons. The two are not the same. And it's so important to know that Yiddishkeit is rich, and Yiddishkeit is vast, and Yiddishkeit is geschmack, and we can have a fantastic relationship with Hashem. And your relationship doesn't have to look the same as somebody else, not even the same as somebody else within your family. It's your relationship with God. For some people, their relationship is going to look vastly different than other people's, because everybody has their own level of frumkeit, their own level of religiosity. And if a person tunes into it, they just relax and they do their mitzvahs b'simcha, then they're going to reach that natural level of religiosity. And for some people, that might be palm tights, but for other people, it might be a slinky skirt and a pair of socks. Both are kosher. Both are within the realm of halacha. Both are mitzvahs. So don't let your relationship be defined by the frumkites, by the societal standards. If something doesn't feel right, it's not because the Torah is imperfect. It's because something is not correctly aligning with your natural level of frumkeit. And that needs to be evaluated. But don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because the Torah is perfect and you can find your place within it. So whether you shave or you don't shave, know what your mitzvah is. And if you're a married woman, your mitzvah is to properly cover your hair, because that is Yiddishkeit, not frumkeit.